Hi, everybody. I am here with Mr. Bob Betz, MW, in front of all these vintages of Pere de Famille. Now, today we have a flight of Pere de Famille. We're really excited about it. Being that we can't see all of you right now and coronavirus is going, we thought we would take this time to sit down, talk about Pere de Famille, why Bob started making it in the first place, the differences in the vintages, where they are today, and where we are going in the future. And I'm super excited about it. Bob drove all the way out from Kirkland, which is almost 10 minutes from here.
12 today.
To get to the winery. So we're super excited about that. 2015, for those that worked this vintage, winemakers that worked this vintage in Washington State, no one will ever forget it. It was a challenging year. It was a bit of, we like to say it was a bit of a roller coaster ride. We had a lot of, how should I put this? The season had a lot of ups and downs, heat accumulation wise. So we had a lot of, I guess, we'd start out one week and we'd be at a 75-degree high daytime temperature, and by the end of the next week we'd hit 99 Fahrenheit, and we kind of saw a lot of patterns like that during the season. So it was tricky to, I guess, kind of gauge the speed, especially when we were getting close to harvest season, like the actual harvest period. It was kind of difficult to gauge the rate at which the grapes were ripening. And I know that sounds a little strange, but it's something that we always have to pay attention to during harvest season, is not just going out there to the vineyards, once a week or once every 2 weeks and saying, oh, the grapes taste good. We go out there frequently to be able to kind of understand not only, how close are they to ripeness, but kind of how quickly the grapes are ripening. And that certainly can be influenced by the seasonal weather patterns. But 2015, it was tough because of that. So it was always like, well, things would slow down for 5 or 10 days, and then they'd speed back up, and then they'd slow down again, and they'd speed back up. And it was complicated a little bit by some rain events that we had, particularly close to harvest season. But 2015 challenged us in that we had never actually picked any red grapes in August before. Exactly. And so it's kind of hard to live on both ends of that spectrum, which is some years you could be trying to pick Merlot at the end of September, and yet in 2015 we were picking it in the last week of August. So it definitely challenged us to say, is this the right call? But earlier picking in 15, I think it worked out pretty well for our cellar. I think we captured a lot of freshness in the Pere de Famille.
This roller coaster ride that Louis described is an enormous challenge for grape sampling. And the crew gets into the vineyard and pulls samples 3 times a week, 4 times a week sometimes, to see, do we need to harvest? Do we need to harvest Monday, or is it Tuesday? Is it Tuesday or is it Thursday? And we stand in the lab and we taste through these things, we run the chem analysis, etc. But ultimately it's based on what these things feel like and taste like on the palate. And I remember 15 as being an enormous challenge. And you looked at me and said, Bob, we need to harvest these grapes in August. And I thought, never in my life will I see a time when we have to harvest Washington fruit in August. I mean, come on, what kind of vintage is this? Mm-hmm. And what it ended up doing was giving us very smart decision making by being as attentive to detail as we were in the vineyard sampling, as well as in the lab analyzing, and giving us a wine of power, dimension, completeness, but still with the energy that had we not harvested the fruit early, we would have wound up with kind of flaccid and just kind of boring red compote versus a wine with energy, structure, and real dimension of its fruit.
Tension, sure. Yeah. I mean, when you think about 2015, it was kind of you could talk about challenges we had in every season in Washington State, but when you're talking about 15, 16, and 2017, each one of those vintages challenged us maybe in a different way. Certainly 2015 with its early start, roller coaster ride of heat kind of ebbing and flowing. 2016, on the other hand, was a very different type of vintage. We came off of the winter from 2015 to 2016 was quite warm. So the season actually started early in 2016. May was particularly warm. We actually broke a lot of records in our viticultural area in Columbia Valley for, I think, most heat accumulation, highest daytime temps, warmest cumulative nighttime temp, I want to say as well. So a lot of people put all this data together at the first few days of June of 2016, and us internally, our team, talking with other winemakers, we were kind of like, whoa, we're going to be in for a really hot, heavy early season, and so that we had that in the back of our mind already.
In fact, the data supported that May 30th of 2016 had higher heat accumulation than 2015 at the same date.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And 2015, we challenged us for early harvest and heat accumulation. So we kind of from looking in that in June, looking back at May, from June, we were like, whoa, we're really going to have to be active in the vineyard, pay a lot of attention. But I think what Bob always likes to, when he talks about heat accumulation, or I guess seasonal weather patterns, and talking about heat, it's not just about total accumulation, it's about distribution. And it's something that Bob said for a long time. And I think 2016 might highlight that more than any other season that I can think of, because if you look at just the total heat accumulation we had over the season, it's not that different from 2014 or 2015, but the distribution was quite different. We had most of our heat early in the season, and as we got closer to the harvest period, we actually started, I guess mid-season, our heat accumulation was a little more comparable to 2012, which Bob likes to say is pretty close to the long-term average, 2012. Mm-hmm. And by the time we get into the final ripening months, really the end of August, all of September, and certainly October, the grapes were ripening, particularly Cabernet Sauvignon, under pretty cool conditions. The skins were a little thinner than we'd usually see for Cabernet Sauvignon, and a saying that, I guess a famous French quote is, August makes the must, and I think in the New World we could mostly say September makes the must. And what that means is that final ripening period really kind of can shape the character quality of the wine, maybe more than the other parts of the season. And I think 2016 is a perfect example of that. I think when you actually sit down and taste the wine like we're doing right now, we see that the texture is very fine, maybe more generous right now than a lot of other vintages of Pere de Famille on either side of it. The result of those thinner skins, thinner doesn't mean bad, thicker doesn't mean good, one or the other. It's just, I think there's a texture in 2016 that we were able to capture that we don't often see.
This wine has extraordinary dimension, a dimension of big fruits, but fruits that have delineation. And I'm going through, I've got a litany of terms that I'm just kind of thinking of with this, and this blue fruit, which I don't commonly get blue fruit out of a lot of Cabernet, but this one has some blueberry, certainly blackberry and cassis and eucalyptus and a little bit of rose petal and fresh tobacco and graphite and just the slightest hint of oak smoke. Plus, it's a wine of real dimension. And I think August made the must on this wine. August was still generous in terms of its heat, and then we cooled down and we preserved that fruit beam that's coming through in this wine. It's an extraordinary vintage.
2017, kind of the third vintage that I'll never forget. I think a lot of us will never forget. Unusual for a number of reasons. That winter was actually very cold. That 2016-2017 winter was very cold. I remember after the harvest, boy, we must have been going to maybe WAG to do a presentation, but I reached out to a bunch of our different growers in the Columbia Valley, and I kind of asked them for some notes on the harvest season. And I remember asking Mike Sauer, and he sent me his notes, and he talked about being out in the vineyard and worried about how long and how cold it had been out in the vineyard. So they took some heavy equipment, went out, and they actually measured the permafrost, how deep it was actually out in the vineyard. And I don't recall what that was exactly, but it was certainly enough to make him worry about like just how cold it was. You know, he was worried about vine damage. Yeah. Yep. So that gives you an idea of just how cold that winter was from 2016 to 2017. And so why I'm bringing that up, pointing it out, is we actually had a very late start to the season in 2017. It was very late, and I remember some of our earliest trips out to the vineyard, talking with the different growers. I think there were a lot of comparisons, kind of where we were along the evolution or how much heat accumulation we had so far in the season. Most people were comparing it to either 2010 or 2011, and so that's that's kind of how the season started, was kind of a later than normal bud break and starting with very cool weather. And I think there's one more other thing that I think you could highlight or kind of bring into the conversation, which is, if you talk to growers that have been doing this long enough, 10 years, 20 years, most of them have noticed that if you start your season like if you start bud break later than normal, you're usually going to start your harvest later than normal. And if you actually have an early bud break, 9 out of 10 times you're going to actually harvest your grapes early. So that was kind of the context of which we kind of looked at the vintage as things started to go. But unlike 2016, it was almost the opposite effect of 2016, where in 2016 the season got cooler. 2017, the season actually, finally, by the time we get into June, things really start picking up. And then they got very hot, like historically hot. So we actually were facing some pretty long stretches, like duration-wise, long stretches of sustained heat, 100-degree Fahrenheit, that actually we were getting a little worried about. And at the same time, and I'll never forget this, at the same time, we were dealing with wildfires in the north of us in British Columbia and in the south of us in the Columbia Gorge. And so there was this high elevation smoke layer that was actually, you could say, buffering some of the light intensity and heat accumulation. And it actually, in the end, actually kind of worked to our advantage during maybe 2 or 3 key long stretches, 8-day stretches of sustained heat, where we thought, they actually predicted that we might hit 106, 107, 108 Fahrenheit on Red Mountain, and it never materialized because we actually had that smoke layer. I'm talking high elevation now, that actually kind of moderated the temperature to where we only just crested 100 Fahrenheit. And let me tell you, the difference between 100 Fahrenheit or 101 and actually realizing 108, it's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. And how lucky were we that it was high elevation haze versus the actual smoke. We probably had more smoke here on the western side of the mountains than in the vineyards. And it was lower. And so there was some real concern about lung health and all those things. But in the vineyards, it was a very high haze, so there was really no smoke taint in the vineyards. I still have not tasted a 17 that has had, from any vineyard, any winery in Washington, that had any smoke taint associated with it, which is, thank you. Yeah. This was great stuff. What it gave us, though, I loved your reference back to 10 and 11. And what I saw with the 17 is a wine of a similar character, but with a little more generosity than the 10 and 11 have right now. And I think that's because of the dimension of heat in August, built a little bit richer must, and gave us a wine with a little higher dry extract, more components in the wine. And sit on this one, okay? The 17 is a wonderful wine for the cellar. Drink some of these earlier vintages and wait for these 17s to have a couple more years on them before you start. If you do drink it now, a couple hours in a decanter, but it's all there. That's what's essential.
It is. I love the concentration in 2017. We had some historically low yields naturally in 2017, particularly with Cabernet Sauvignon. So I think that it's probably on par with the 2014 for being a very concentrated vintage for Cabernet Sauvignon.
Thank you for joining us during this vertical tasting experience with our founder, Bob Betz, and winemaker, Louis Skinner. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or visit our website to learn more about the team and the wines we make here at Betz Family Winery.